Hello guys and welcome back. I hope you're doing fine. There's been a while that I did not post, but now I'm back, like Samurai Jack. Anyway, what is Mereology? Mereology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with the relationship between a part and a whole. The central question in Mereology is basic and very simple. When does parts become a whole? For example, when does the parts of my phone come together to form a phone? I know this is quite an old classic phone, but anyway, it works as an example. So what is a part and what is a whole? And if a whole X is composed of Y's, does X equal Y? Does a phone equal its atoms that compose it? If a phone was just an arrangement of atoms, how is that not correct? And under which conditions do some things come together and compose a further thing? This is a glass, everybody agrees with this. And this is the very famous pot. People that are old in my channel would easily recognize it. So this is a pot and this is a glass, alright? We could all agree that this is just a glass for the moment, alright? But how about now? We could still say that this is still just a glass. How about now? Yeah, it's still just a glass. What if I keep on adding water? It's not just a glass right now, is it? It's rather right now a glass of water. But hey, if I spill the water back in the pot, I feel like a chemist doing this. Is it a glass of water now? It's not. Because hey, there is not enough water. But definitely, if you're saying that a glass of water is simply a glass plus water, there is still enough water over here. Why isn't it a glass of water? And when does the magic happen? When does just a glass turns to a glass of water? When does that happen? Is there some objective water value that, let's say, 200 centiliters that must be inside a glass, so it could be a glass of water? When does this rule come from? Why can't this glass be a glass of water, even though it has just this much water? You could easily have lots of examples with this. Like for example, a teenager turns to be an adult. When does he turn into an adult? When does he turn into an adult? When does the magic happen? Well, we all agree right now that he or she is not an adult unless he or she is at least 18. So, based on that, would you say that if I was 17 and tomorrow I'll turn 18 because tomorrow is my birthday, like when my birthday hits, do I turn into an adult right then and right there, just like that? Of course not. This sounds absurd. When does a compilation of years turn you into an adult, leaving your teenagehood? And when does a composition of paper turns into a book? Is it after the page number 50? Is it after the page number 100? And the list goes on. We could all agree that my phone is a composition of parts, yes? But alright, if I do this, I take the cover out. Would you say that it's still a phone? Of course, yes, you would still say that this is a phone. If you, for example, find an object like this in the street, you would still say, hey, I found a phone. Okay, let's take out the battery now. Let's take out the battery. Would we say that this is still a phone? Of course, yes, you still find something like that in the street, you would still say, hey, I found a phone. Maybe a phone without a cover and without a battery, but it's still a phone. I could go on even further if I invest more effort. I could take out the SIM card and I could take the screen out and the buttons out also. If I kept on going, taking parts of my phone, I know exactly that I would reach a particular time in which I cannot recognize my phone to be a phone. And if someone finds it in the street, he wouldn't say that he found a phone, but just an unknown object. The problem is, when does my phone stop being itself? And if I kept on rearranging and composing those parts again, when does the phone starts to be itself? I wouldn't say when does the phone starts to be itself. I would say when does the parts start to be a phone? When do they form a phone? When does the magic happen? We'll try to answer these questions with a set of theories. The number one, Mereological Universalism. Anything ever could always compose an object. This is a remote control and this is a phone. We could compose them and say, hey, this is a new object. This is what Mereological Universalism says. If there are objects, we could always collect them to form new wholes. As much as this sounds absurd, you could still accept it. Like a remote phone. But it goes on even deeper than that. I'm looking at a mountain right now. I could go on near the mountain and just say, me and the mountain right now form a new object. Of course, this would sound to you ridiculous and a bit stupid. Because hey, our brains are used to approach things pragmatically, since a human being and the knob and the mountain basically have no usefulness, either in language and either in our practical life. Why would they form a whole? This is where Mereological Universalism actually responds. Why does a compilation of parts make a phone and a compilation of a remote and a phone cannot compose a whole? Why does parts compose a whole, that is a phone, and why doesn't those two parts compose a new thing like remote phone or phone remote control, whatever? Mereological Universalism says just because two objects are not pragmatic, are not useful, doesn't mean they do not exist ontologically. Doesn't mean that the existence of that object is not there ontologically. Because at the end, reality does not care about usefulness. If you say parts could form a table, why not a pen and a phone form pen phone or phone pen? Why do you treat yourself as a standard for a Mereological reality? So based on Mereological Universalism, there is an infinite amount of wholes that we don't know of. We're just focusing on the wholes that are useful to us. Matter of fact, those wholes wouldn't even be wholes if they were not useful. Like a house, for example, is just a collection of wood and bricks and iron, why not? And the bricks is just other compilation of fundamental atoms, and it goes on. Why do we say that reality equals usefulness? I think this contention of Mereological Universalism is quite solid, because it shows that we cannot simply say that an object is just because it is useful. Usefulness is simply not a measure of ontology. Let's jump straight to a Mereological Nihilism. A theory that I personally subscribe to because I am a materialist and I tend to reduce everything to its fundamental essence. The fundamental idea of Mereological Nihilism, if Mereological Universalism says that parts always compose objects, Mereological Nihilism says that parts never compose objects. In Mereological Nihilism, there are no phones, there are no tables, there are no TVs, there are no houses. It reduces everything to its fundamental particles. See this? It doesn't really exist. Not in the sense that it doesn't exist like physically, we all agree it does. Of course, not invoking Cartesian skepticism. We all agree that a phone exists. Yes, but a phone itself is just an idea. It's just an intersubjective idea. If I take this, for example, and went to another country, of course, people would have an equivalent translation of a phone. They would say, for example, hatif in Arabic, or they would say, for example, un téléphone in French. It would always represent this idea that we have in our minds about phones. But just because there is some Platonic idea in people's minds doesn't mean it has an objective ontology. Of course, the phone exists physically, but if all these people that recognize this as being a phone cease to exist, let's say, would this still be a phone? If we get back in the past and show this to a caveman, would he really recognize it as being a phone? If we go on to the distant future, travel in time, and show this to a man, would he really recognize it as being a phone? If some alien civilization comes to Earth, would they recognize this as being a phone? The idea of a phone and the whole existence of phone is contingent of an intersubjective complex connection between subjects that all keep on imagining that this is a phone and that is a TV and where I am right now is a house. Of course, this is a phone, yes. It could be the case that some alien civilization comes from another galaxy or whatever, and don't really recognize this as being a phone. They might recognize this as, I don't know, maybe a share or something. I know this would sound absurd. I mean, how come a phone be recognized as a share? Of course, it would be recognized as a share because we find it absurd just because our brains are really used to this phone being in our pockets and we use it for communication. Just because human beings are this way. We are like this. Okay, so we arranged the fundamental particles of this phone. We arranged them phone-wise. We arranged them to sort of represent some particular idea in our minds to facilitate communication. Okay? So we're gonna get back to universal Mereology. Usefulness doesn't really give you ontology, okay? Just because humans are this way, we sort of made some particular idea turn into get realized into a phone, into a physical object. If there comes an alien civilization tomorrow, of course, aliens don't really resemble humans and they don't really have needs like us, and their morphology and their structure and their anatomy is not like ours. Of course, they could recognize this as a chair. They might be very tiny that they could sit on this, basically. There has been a time in my childhood that we had in our house a DVD player, right? But there was one time that my mother was doing the chores and she somehow opened that DVD player and she found lots of ants in there. Well, for us, it was always a DVD player, but not for the ants. It was like a house or something. So this is Mereological Nihilism. It only shows that the phone, a table, house don't really exist because everything should be reduced to its fundamental particles. A phone exists only in your mind. Once you cease to exist, the phone also would cease to exist. Let's get back to the glass. Of course, this glass is an arrangement of atoms glass-wise, let's say. Of course, if I have a saw, a small saw or a knife or a really sharp tool, I could definitely get some pieces of glass out of this. But if I got those pieces of glass out of this glass, would it still be a glass? Of course, yes, it would be still a glass. Sure. But how about the pieces of glass that I've taken out from the glass? Are they also a glass? Of course not. This is absurd. But isn't this what Mereological Nihilism says? That a glass doesn't exist, it's only fundamental particles. Of course, yes, but those fundamental particles must be organized glass-wise. The idea must be met, the idea that we have in mind about a glass that has some void inside of it that would allow it to contain water, this idea must met, and those atoms must be shaped glass-wise accordingly to the idea that we have about a glass. But of course, if I had a button, for example, that I could just push, and all the ideas about a glass would vanish from all the minds of people around, would this still be a glass? Of course not. It would be just a very strange object to see. The cup or the glass suddenly would cease to exist. Okay, let's jump right now to restricted composition. This theory of Mereology actually stands between universal Mereology or Mereological Universalism and Mereological Nihilism. It stands between them. It says that composition occurs, but according to laws that should be respected. Biological restriction. Only living organisms actually are a whole. But of course, the table and the house and the phone don't really exist. And I could pretty much agree because, hey, a line exists subjectively. If humanity ceases to exist and there comes another alien civilization, of course they would still view the line as a line. Of course they wouldn't call it a line. There would be an equivalent translation in their language if they use a language, but they would still see that a line objectively exists. We take a line, we push it back in time, people would still recognize, hey, it's a line, it's this living being. That's a line that's very dangerous to approach. We push it further into the future, hey, it's a line. A line would be always a line because of the nature of the line that would not be changed, unlike a phone. A phone could be used like a door or something for, I don't know, for animals or for alien civilizations. But a lion is still a living organism that hunts, or let's not even say hunt because it could be put in a zoo. A lion is still a living organism that eats, that reproduces and things like that. The bonding view in restricted composition. This says that we could have two objects and bond them strongly. If we bind them strongly, we could have a new object. But how strong can we bind them so that we could have a new object? And even if I do this, people would still recognize this as two objects, just glued or something like that. They still have this idea that those are two things because they are pragmatically used for different purposes. They do meet some independent ideas in their minds. But of course, if it leans to a Mereological Universalism, of course, yes, we have already said that if I stand next to a mountain or climb the mountain, we could easily say that me and the mountain formed a new whole. And there is of course functional unity. If we have two objects, two parts that come together and function simultaneously for some task, we could easily say that yes, that's a whole, that's a one. Like the human body, for example. You got your whole organs functioning together to digest food, respond to stimulus, reproduce, and all that. We could say that this is a whole. But what if we got a patient that his kidneys are not working? Would we say that that human being is a whole? He is a whole and his kidneys are independent of him because he's basically this machine that works properly unless with the kidneys. But of course you could say that machine would not work properly without the kidneys. But of course, you could easily live with one kidney. I'm saying that what if you got one kidney that's not working properly? Would you say that under this theory, functional unity in Mereology, that the human being is a whole plus a damaged or not working kidney? And of course, we could safely say that every theory has its own problems. And I know in this video I have said much questions, not rather much answers, because well, hey, this is philosophy. Let's jump to Mereological essentialism. This theory says if an object has parts, it cannot survive to lose them. Like for example, if a table has a surface and four legs, has this surface, this rectangular surface and four legs supporting it. If we take, for example, one of those legs It's no longer a table. What is it then? I think because of our advanced cognition, even if we take one leg, because our brains can really fill the gaps, we could still imagine that this is a table, it just lacks one leg, and we could conceptually have the leg added to the table to have some particular image that this object in front of us realizes. And so we could still call it a table. But what if we take two legs? This becomes a bit hard. But we could still imagine it. We could still conceptualize that in our minds. What if we take three legs? That would be right now very hard to do so. It wouldn't be a table by then. What if we take four legs and you simply have this surface right now, this board? It wouldn't be a table, would it? It would be probably a board, like a skin board. Why not? Since people identify things according to usefulness, yeah, that would be a board. This would lead us finally to the ship of Theseus and the problem of identity. If this is my phone, right? But I go on and keep on replacing every part, a part in a while. Go on and replace the cover. I replace it. I replace the battery too. Replace the SIM card. Replace the screen. Replace the buttons and all. Over time. Would my phone still be my phone? Of course it would be a phone. Yes. But is it still my phone? No, definitely it's still mine because it's my possession. But is it the phone that I'm used to? And what is the difference between this phone and a brand new phone in a shop? What is the difference with that? Because I've already replaced every part. If the whole is identical to its parts and the parts are all changed, would the whole be changed or not? I think some would say yes, because that my phone, the object that I have physically right now, still complies and realizes some particular idea of a phone in my mind and definitely some usefulness into it. Sure, that would be still my phone. But for people that are following Mereological Nihilism, for example, would say that no, because a phone is its distinct fundamental particles. Once you change the distinct fundamental particles, you have a new object. Even if it is made phone-wise, it's still not yours. Of course, this ship of Theseus thought experiment really poses a lot of problems, especially in identity, knowing that human beings keep on changing. They change their cells and their personality too changes. So why would we still think that we are still the same person? I dig deeper into that in one of my videos exploring identity. I'll put a link in the description. And if some of you got the answer of when does my glass turns to be a glass of water, please tell me. Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one.